So Lee Haskins managed to successfully defend his IBF Bantamweight title against Stuart Hall. Of course, this was at 118 pounds. This was actually a rematch of a fight these two had a few years earlier for the European Bantamweight title. I didn't quite agree with the decision, though. I thought it was a bit wide for Haskins. It was an either way type of fight. I personally actually thought that Stuart Hall won the fight. I thought that he took over in the later rounds, managed to make a pretty good impression on Haskins, but Haskins wound up coming away with the victory. 117, 111, 116, 112, and 115, 113. He managed to get all three judges' scorecards. I thought that Hall won, however. It appeared at first like Haskins was just a little bit too quick for Hall, a little bit too slick for Hall, just a little bit too good of a boxer overall. But Hall is a big, strong guy. You know, he outweighed Haskins for the second day IBF weigh-in by about 6.5 pounds. So, I mean, just that alone. I mean, not to mention that he could have gained even more weight than that. That, you know, it shows that there was definitely a size difference once they stepped into the ring, and most likely a strength difference as well. Haskins is a lot more of like a stylistic type of fighter, and a guy that started off at a lower weight class too. You know, he's this guy that started off as a flyweight, eventually kind of grew into becoming a bantamweight, whereas, you know, Stuart Hall is just a tall, broad-shouldered, just mean dude. You know, he's like pretty stick thin as a bantamweight, but he's a guy that's, you know, fought as high as super featherweight even. So he definitely has some size on him, some strength on him, and he was giving Haskins the business from the mid rounds on. Haskins was able to outbox him. In the early rounds, they kind of traded rounds back and forth in the mid rounds, but I thought that Hall took over. I thought that the right hand was landing pretty nicely and cleanly against Haskins. Haskins was leaving his hands down a little bit too long for a little bit too much of a time while he was at mid-range and on the inside. It's all good to be having your hands down when you're really more on the outside, when you don't necessarily have to really worry about having to completely move your head or your torso out of the way in order to evade punches. At least you might have some sort of a defensive construct up in order to potentially either block, parry, catch, or catch and shoot punches yourself. But his hands were just completely down, so he was relying purely on reflexes as he was throwing his punches, as he was throwing the up jab, as he was throwing the left hand from a hands down position. And that's something that can really lead you into trouble, and it kind of did against Hall. Hall managed to catch him with a number of lead right hands and left hooks. You know, he managed to figure out that perfect southpaw versus orthodox angle where he was able to land both of those shots and make an impression on Haskins, especially in the later rounds, where I thought he kind of controlled the championship rounds, essentially, and that's the reason why I thought that he won. But in spite of that, Haskins managed to get the decision, and, you know, fair play to him. He did a solid job overall. Both guys really did a solid job. I wouldn't mind seeing the third fight, but I doubt it's going to happen considering the fact that Hall primarily got this fight by being a mandatory. Of course, Hall had initially had this belt, lost it to Randy Caballero. Caballero was due to fight the mandatory, which was Lee Haskins, didn't make the weight, so he got summarily stripped of his title, and Haskins won it essentially on the scale without ever having to fight for it. And then now Haskins managed to defeat Hall. You know, funny enough, too, though, is I actually thought that Hall could have potentially lost his last fight against Rodrigo Guerrero, a guy that's been a former champion at super flyweight and a pretty solid contender overall. So actually, I wouldn't mind seeing Lee Haskins fight Rodrigo Guerrero if they could make that happen. I know Guerrero's still ranked really highly in the IBF, like about top 5, top 10, somewhere in there. So I wouldn't mind seeing Haskins versus Guerrero. It'd be two southpaws. Guerrero's a little bit more of an aggressor, though, so I think it'd be a good style matchup. You know, boxer mover versus more of like a boxer swarmer in what Guerrero is. Really a really fun, interesting fight, I think that would be. Otherwise, there's Omar Narvaez, the former WBO super flyweight champion. Of course, most people know him recently for having been knocked out by Naoya Inoue, but in spite of that loss, you know, he's racked up some pretty nice wins at bantamweight, and he's looking to try and get back into the title run opportunity. So Haskins versus Narvaez fight would be really interesting. You know, Narvaez is pretty much a known quantity, a guy that's his only two losses were to Nonito Donaire and Naoya Inoue, you know, two guys that were at some point or another, whether it's the past or the present, for Inoue in Inoue's case, have been rated in the pound for pound. So Narvaez is a guy that, you know, was undefeated as a flyweight, undefeated as a super flyweight until Inoue, and his one fight at Bantamweight initially, of course, ended with him losing to Donaire, but it was a competitive fight where he gave Donaire a lot of issues. Otherwise, he's managed to return to Bantamweight and pretty much clean house with everybody that he's fought so far. So I think that'd be a solid fight for Haskins. Like I said, Narvaez, Guerrero would be a solid fight. Any of the other champions, Zolani Tete, if they were to manage to get that fight made, although there's the whole Frank Warren versus Eddie Hearn thing, so that's probably not on the cards, unfortunately. And then, actually another guy that may be interesting there would be Karim Guerfi, guy from France, who managed to defeat, what was the guy's name? Alejandro Gonzalez? The guy that knocked down Carl Frampton a couple of times at Super Bantamweight. He returned back to Bantamweight, fought Karim Guerfi, and Guerfi managed to win a very, very close decision over him. I think that would be a great fight for Haskins as well. Any of those three guys, I think, would be just solid opponents. Tomoki Kameda, actually, I'd like to see back in the ring. I wouldn't mind seeing him against Haskins, but I don't think he's even ranked in the IBF, so I think that's probably a non-starter. But otherwise, I pretty much summed up what my overall thoughts on that whole situation there. The other champions seem to be tied up at the moment. You got Rashid Warren probably going to be fighting Jamie McDonnell in the near future for the WBA's unification thing going down. You got Shinsuke Yamanaka fighting Anselmo Moreno pretty soon in, in a couple weeks now, I believe. And then Marlon Tapales is going to be fighting Naoya Inoue's little, is that his little brother? Yeah, that's his little brother, Takumi Inoue. Takumi Inoue is going to be fighting Marlon Tapales for the WBO Bantamweight title, most likely on New Year's. Not quite New Year's, but December 30th. Ostensibly New Year's in Japan. So that'll be really interesting. The Bantamweight division's heating up a little bit too, along with Super Flyweight and Flyweight. A little bit more shine being given to the divisions, and it's pretty solid. A lot of these guys are fighting each other, which is all you can really hope for. So hopefully they continue the trend. Hopefully we get Haskins versus some of the guys that I named. And that's pretty much all I got to say on this one. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.